We've got a lot to do today, so I want to make sure we get started on time. So good morning and welcome to the State of Women in Indiana. My name is Callie McCune and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the Indiana Historical Society. It's my pleasure to have you all here today. We've got a lot to do today, so I want to make sure we get started on time. So good morning and welcome to the State of Women in Indiana. My name is Callie McCune and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the Indiana Historical Society. It's my pleasure to have you all here today. At the Indiana Historical Society, we are Indiana's storyteller, connecting people to the past. We do this by collecting millions upon millions of pieces of paper that tell Indiana's unique stories. Things like books and paintings, letters and photographs, diaries and maps, and then finding intriguing and unexpected ways to share and remember the past, whether that's through publications, exhibitions, or events like this. It is through these pieces that we tell the diverse, unconventional, sometimes even saucy stories of Indiana and inspire a future grounded in our state's uniting values and principles. We're so excited to partner again with Women for Change Indiana to bring our perspectives on where we've come from and how each of us can get involved in making our state a better place today. Throughout the last year, we've been commemorating the voices of Hoosier heroines and their persistent sisters from around the country who fought for women's rights to vote. During that almost 70-year fight, women organized and marched. They rallied and wrote to make their voices heard and fight for their right to execute their basic civic duty, to vote. The 19th Amendment gave most women in the United States the right to suffrage. But as we know, even 100 years later, there's a lot of work left to be done. So today we want to talk about how we can make Indiana a better place for women to live economically, politically, and culturally. So when we set out to plan today's workshop, we wanted to start with the tactics of our persistent foremothers that they used to get the right to vote and try to bring them to today. So over the course of our workshop, you'll not only hear, you'll get a chance to be inspired by some trailblazing Hoosier ladies. I'm so excited about the people you're going to hear from just in a few minutes and coming up today. And also find ways that you can advocate for your cause. We hope you'll leave empowered and energized and be one step closer to making change in your community. And I say all this does not exactly look like what we thought this workshop would look like when we started planning back in January and February and even after last year. Usually I get to welcome you from the Basile History Center at the Eugenia Maryland Glick Indiana History Center in my bright, beautiful auditorium and help move you along throughout the day throughout our building. But like Hoosier suffragists before us, we adapt to technology, and so our goal is to bring you the best virtual conference we can. So think of me today like your tour guide. I'm going to be moving you between platforms and rooms or with some help of my friends to get you where you need to go. If you feel lost, always feel free to message us over the chat, and we'll be putting links to make sure you get to the different rooms you need. But before I toss this over to Rima to really get us moving, I have a couple pieces of logistics, as all good tour guides do. This panel conversation will last most of an hour, but before time ends, we should have some time for questions. Please use the question and answer box, which I've circled. You can see it at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as we can before time is up. This program is being recorded, and we will put it up on the Women for Change Facebook page within the next few days, and you can catch the replay there, as well as most likely on Women for Change's website. And lastly, we want to make sure that over today, we're creating an atmosphere of civility and engagement as we go along. We know that we all come from different places and we all have different experiences. So please be respectful as you make comments, ask questions, and converse throughout the day. Try to seek understanding as to where people come from rather than assuming the worst. We all need a little bit more, I think, kindness in our world. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Rima from Women for Change to get us going. Hi, Rima.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Rima Shahid, and I'm the Executive Director of Women for Change. Thank you for joining us today at the 3rd Annual State of Women Conference. I'm not going to be like the other Zoom events that you may have recently attended and say this year's conference looks a little different. We miss being with you all in person, and please excuse any technical difficulties that may arise as we are all in this together. But again, that's not something I'm going to say to you today. This spring, as we were all being acquainted with this calamity of a pandemic, we heard pots and pans across the nation banging in celebration of what we came to call essential workers. A sonic release of the unsettling shutdown of our nation. By summer, the sound of our lives became of protest and rage. And now as summer winds down, there's an odd sense of normalcy, but we are wondering, will we go back? Will we go back to those same habits that we adopted during the pandemic? And once again, rely on the same people that would risk their lives to provide us with the goods and services that we all need. It may come as a surprise to you that a majority of our essential workers are women. And at Women for Change, we have been advocating for our policies that are long needed in our state and nation. We are proud that one of our key focus areas of our public policy agenda has been women's economic stability. For instance, we have worked on reasonable pregnancy accommodations, affordable childcare options, and paid family leave. This pandemic has really shown us that our public policy agenda is even more relevant and pressing now than it was 6 months ago. Throughout the day, you'll hear from nationally renowned experts and local leaders on topics such as maternal and infant mortality, fair voting and voter access, advocating in our state, mobilizing in your community, and engaging young voters. This year is different, not just because of the pandemic, not just because we are not all together, but because this year we commemorated the 19th Amendment. You may have asked yourself, why unfinished business? What does the title of this event even mean? Although the suffrage movement made tremendous strides for white women, it was not for another 45 years before all women won the right to vote. Unfortunately, we have always had to fight for our most basic rights, haven't we? And my fellow advocates, the business is unfinished because we know that there is still a long path to equity and equality for all. It is unfinished. You will now hear from my dear friend, mentor, founding board member for Women for Change, and now Women for Change advisor, Andrea Richter-Gary. Andrea, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Rima, thank you so much for the warm welcome. It's a true honor to be here today for the Inspire Keynote and to introduce these 5 amazing women to our audience. First, I'd like to welcome our moderator to the virtual stage, Dr. Laura Merrifield Wilson. She's an assistant professor for political science at the University of Indianapolis. At UIndy, she also serves as the assistant director for fellowships, the pre-law advisor, and the faculty leader of the Gender Center. Throughout her academic career, Dr. Merrifield Wilson has crafted an academic focus on gender politics as well as campaigns and elections, so it's very timely to have you here today. Outside of the classroom, this passion spills over to active community service, including sitting on the boards of the Girl Scouts of Central Indiana and the Marion County Commission on Youth. Finally, you may catch Dr. Merrifield Wilson on various local political TV shows each weekend morning, so be sure to tune in. Welcome to Dr. Merrifield Wilson. Next, it's my privilege to introduce our 4 keynote panelists. We could be here all morning if I went through all of the achievements and accolades these women have accumulated. So instead, I'll highlight a few common threads they possess: living full lives of public service, serving in the role of Lieutenant Governor for Indiana, and having unwavering devotion to improving the lives of all Hoosiers in Indiana. So first, I'd like to welcome Kathy Davis, who holds the distinction of being the first woman to hold the office of Lieutenant Governor in Indiana. Kathy has held many other public sector positions as well, including State Budget Director, Secretary of the Family and Social Services Administration, and Controller for the City of Indianapolis. Currently, Kathy is a small business owner and runs Davis Design Group, where they use modeling and analysis to find strategies to meet design operation goals. Kathy also sits on numerous boards, including chairing the board of the Lumina Foundation for Education and the Central Indiana Community Foundation. Finally, I had the pleasure of meeting Kathy when I first became a Hoosier around 4 years ago, and she was integral in consultation for getting Women for Change off the ground. So it's fantastic to have you part of this event today. Next, I'd like to welcome Becky Skillman. Becky has the historic honor of being the first woman elected as Lieutenant Governor of Indiana. She held this position from 2005 until 2013, and during that time held more legal duties than any other lieutenant governor in the country. She has been a true public servant throughout her life, starting first as a state senator and going on to be the first woman to chair the Indiana Senate Majority Caucus. A central focus of her public life has been advocating for economic development of small towns and rural communities. She continues to work on these issues as chairwoman of Radius Indiana, a regional economic development partnership representing 8 counties in southern Indiana. She sits on numerous boards, including that of Old National Bank, and shares her expertise as an advisor to Indiana University and Ball State. Finally, her service never ends as she stepped up this past spring during the COVID pandemic to serve as an advisor to Governor Holcomb on the state's Economic Relief and Recovery Task Force. Welcome, Becky. Our next panelist, Sue Elsperman, has created a more than 30-year career focused on higher education, economic and workforce development, and public service. She served as Lieutenant Governor of Indiana starting in 2013 and oversaw 6 different agencies and led numerous international agricultural trade missions. After conclusion of her time in office, Sue assumed the role of president of Ivy Tech Community College of Indiana in 2016, the first female to do so. Ivy Tech is the nation's largest singly accredited statewide community college system and a true asset to our state. In these auspices, she has also published articles and research on workforce development and innovation. In addition to focusing on higher education, she's very involved in the community where she sits on the One America Board of Directors, the advisory board of the Indiana Conference for Women, and has previously served on dozens of other nonprofits, boards, and committees. Finally, it's my true pleasure to welcome the current and 52nd Lieutenant Governor of Indiana, Suzanne Crouch. Lieutenant Governor Crouch hails from Evansville and got her start in public service as the auditor of Vanderburgh County, where they received their first clean bill of health in decades from the State Board of Accounts. She then went on to serve as county commissioner and then state representative. Prior to being elected lieutenant governor, she also served as Indiana's state auditor. In her current role, she oversees many portfolios for the state, including agriculture, rural development, counterterrorism, tourism, destination development, and rural affairs, to name just a few. In this historic year, she also chaired the Indiana's Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. I've had the privilege to witness firsthand the lieutenant governor's passion for her job, whether it's advocating for disability rights or bringing the story of Indiana to our partners across the globe, including trade missions to Canada and Mexico. So with that, thank you for being here today. Now I'd like to turn it over to our moderator to kick things off. So please, Dr. Merrifield Wilson.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And I want to start off by just saying thank you for this incredible, truly once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to serve for a moderator for what I hope will be a really exciting and engaging conversation with these incredible women. I'm really in awe of every one of them, and I look forward to learning from them this morning. I want to thank you for Women for Change and the Indiana Historical Society for this opportunity. Thank you for these remarkable women taking time out of their really busy schedules to join us here and to share their experiences and perspectives and advice with us. The other thing I wanted to say before I get into questions was just talking when Haley initially approached me about this possibility in the summer. I remember being overly enthusiastic and sharing it with my husband, who may have been the only person who was even more excited than I was. And I think behind every great woman is a great man. And though mine is probably taking care of our children right now, hopefully cleaning bits of pancake out of baby nails, I just want to give a shout out to him and also remember that so much of success involves a group effort. And no doubt this was a group effort, and getting 4 women in the same room, or in this case, Zoom, is no small feat, but I want to thank everyone who made that possible. So we know we've made great strides in this state in terms of women involved in public service, but we have so much more to go. And I look forward to learning from these ladies on ways that we can make that happen. So I'm going to start with my first question. I think it's kind of an easy one in some ways, but perhaps you can share some advice and perspective on this. Thinking about why you got involved in public service in the first place. What inspired you to run for office? Was there a catalyst? Was there a light bulb moment? Were there any Hoosier women or other leaders that inspired you? What made you decide to take that plunge?
Laura, if I could start on that, I'd like to highlight, because the woman who inspired me happens to be in the room. I was leading a project for Lieutenant Governor Becky Skillman at the time on some rural strategic planning, which happened to be my background while I was at the University of Southern Indiana. And as I was leading a listening session in Newcastle, Indiana, we were taking all the information in, and I looked at one of Becky's colleagues at the State House and said, boy, we have challenges in rural Indiana. And she looked back at me and said, yes, and you need to go to the Lugar series, which, as many of us know, is the program in Indiana that helps develop women for public service. I knew nothing about it, but I knew that I somehow needed to be deeper engaged and understand how good government worked. And I thank Becky for that opportunity to serve Indiana more than 10 years ago in that role, but that became the spark to how might I engage in a different level beyond my role at the university and my other roles previously, facilitating groups and initiatives. It was truly transformational, and it was the good model that I saw in Lieutenant Governor Becky Skillman at the time, and said, wow, there are some good leaders. And of course, along the way, I got introduced to Senator Lugar himself, which we all know, along with great leaders like Congressman Lee Hamilton, are the kind of leaders that we all aspire to be. And getting to be in their shadows made it easy for me to be inspired to do something bigger.
Well, Sue, thanks so much for your kind words. You're taking us back a few years. And Sue was overqualified and hit the ground running from her first day in the General Assembly. But let's take us back much further, because I was first elected to public office at age 25. I was a kid. And so there weren't many women at higher levels of government to look to for inspiration, but I was the firstborn of 5 granddaughters, and my grandfather and I had a very special relationship from the time I was just a little girl. He talked to me like an adult and shared his interests, which were politics and government. We talked about community service. We talked about giving back. And so I was so comfortable discussing current events with him through the years. It didn't occur to me that I couldn't or shouldn't run for public office at the ripe old age of 25. And so I served, I won, by the way, and I served 16 years as an elected county official, and during the latter years, was elected as the president of all the county officials in the state. So one of the duties was to lobby the legislature on behalf of county government. And now we're getting to the what inspired. I, at that time, of course, living in small town in rural Indiana, I didn't want our small towns, rural counties, to become the least and the last and the lost in the state's economic development plans. And I was spending time there in the legislature and thought perhaps I could bring a voice to help. So that's the what inspiration and the second level of government. And of course, Mitch Daniels was the inspiration for running for lieutenant governor. Was his idea, by the way. I told him I would help. I was serving at the #2 position in leadership in the Senate and thought I could be so helpful in that role. He called my bluff and said, no, I'd rather have you as my partner in state government. And so many
good stories. What good partnership you two have had over the years. It's wonderful. So I came in, I was appointed into elective office. I grew up in Massachusetts, came to Indiana to work for Cummins Engine Company. I worked mostly in operations and had the opportunity to come along to the Department of Transportation with Christine Letts, also from Cummins Engine Company, and recruited by Evan Bayh to bring business management techniques to state government. And the opportunity to work on the operations that serve people was compelling, and I've been nearby ever since. And Frank O'Bannon died in office in September of 2003. Joe Kernan, who was the lieutenant governor, the three-term mayor of South Bend, former POW, and all around great guy with seven sisters, decided that when he ascended to being governor, that he wanted to choose a woman as lieutenant governor. And look what happened. So look what he did. So Joe Kernan died last month, and this park in South Bend has been named for him. So in his honor, and because he has contributed to all of our being here in his way, I wanted to honor him with my virtual background.
Well, and this is actually fascinating and inspiring because I'm hearing stories that I have never heard. And I actually got up and got note cards and a pen. Becky, what you said when you said rural Indiana cannot be the last, the least, and the lost. And I am going to work that into my vocabulary moving forward. But what is the three women that have already spoken, that have served as lieutenant governors, are all trailblazers in their own right. And certainly when Joe Kernan chose you, Kathy, it was because, I expect it was because he recognized how important women were and how their voices needed to be heard. And you are a recognition of that. That's why your portrait is hanging up on the 4th floor in the State House, and we commemorated that just last month when we did our unveiling of the artwork for the Women's Suffrage Centennial Commission. So you were the trailblazer that started it for the rest of us. And Becky Skillman, I mean, the Lieutenant Governor now has more duties and responsibilities than any other Lieutenant Governor in the country because, as I understand the story, when Mitch Daniels asked you to run, you said, I want to be in charge of these things that are all about rural Indiana. And so I don't know if that story is true, I suspect it is, but you are the one that has really actually elevated the importance of the Lieutenant Governor, at least in Indiana. And then Sue, of course, I served with Sue in the House, and she was a rock star immediately. And now, Sue, you just kind of make your own path because you know that God leads us in certain directions, and now heading up the largest community college system in the country is absolutely phenomenal. And so thank you for allowing me this time to be with these incredible women. I didn't grow up in a political home. My parents always voted, but I don't recall political discussions. But I think, like many of my generation, I was inspired by our 40th president, who was such, in my opinion, such a clear voice in defining the essence of America. And what became known as the Reagan Revolution provided young and idealistic conservatives with great purpose. Reagan spoke unapologetically about individual responsibility without discrediting those who needed a helping hand. He built a strong military, and he fought for American values abroad without making new enemies. But he always reminded us that we must never rest in the fight to protect life and liberty. I remember when Ronald Reagan said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And we didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for and protected and handed on for them to do the same. And I think that just that kind of being exposed to something bigger than me actually motivated me to ask my husband one day, that saying, I want to get involved in politics and government, and who should I call? Because I wasn't a Republican, I wasn't a Democrat, I was an independent. I remember going to the polls and voting, and I would go through and I'd vote for all the women. Didn't matter which party, it's just go through and vote for the women, and then go back and look at the men and kind of try to decide. And he gave me the chairman, Republican County Chairman, and that's how I got involved. I'm such a believer that things happen for a reason, and what is meant to be is meant to be. Had my husband given me the card of the Democrat County Chair, I might have gone in a different direction. But I believe that we are all here for a reason, and the women that have been here before me have actually paved the way for me and have made it easier. And I thank you for that, and just for the opportunity to be with you today.
And these are inspiring stories. And it's neat to hear each of you talk about, none of this was an independent decision, it sounds like. Somebody approached you, someone talked about it with you, maybe a couple people did, and you were really inspired by others' leadership. I'm sure you probably get this question, but it's something that I've been dying to know. And I'd like to pose this to each of you. And when you look at Indiana's government, our executive branch, right, at the highest level, we have women outnumbering men. And when you count down all of the different offices, and yet, as I'm sure you know, we've never had a woman serve as governor. We've had 4 great female lieutenant governors. And as women who are very close to that position and probably know it better than anybody else, maybe except for the governors themselves, I'm wondering, why do you think that is? Why haven't we had a woman kind of escalate to that position? And what do you think, following up, what do you think it would take to have that happen?
Well, I think someone needs to run, right? So there's that. That's necessary. And then, it's a very good question. I think it's a difficult question when I think about how do we need to envision it somehow? I mean, I think we need a woman to run who helps us envision it. And that we've now envisioned everything else. Once we envisioned a woman as lieutenant governor, it seemed important to maintain that. So it's the obvious next step. And I think the political parties need to help encourage it. And we need the candidate who knows it needs to be her.
Well, you mentioned the high number of women in statewide elected office today. And our Secretary of State, Connie Lawson, is one of my best friends, has been a friend for years. But I remind her from time to time how lucky she is to be serving with so many women in statewide office, because I was the one woman with 7, 6 men and myself as statewide officials during my period. So I think that's a luxury for her and the others, for you, Suzanne, as well. And I acknowledge that the 4 of us are perhaps the most likely to have become governor. So perhaps you're looking for personal stories, and I'm always happy to share. I did come very close to running for governor. In my 2nd term in office, I continued to raise money, was beginning to put some infrastructure in place to make that happen. I will tell you, however, for 2 years, I couldn't get off of 50-50. Should I run? Should I not run? And I woke up one morning at the end of 2010 and realized that I was moving forward out of expectation and obligation. I didn't want to let down my staff and my friends, and that is not the reason to run. Mitch Daniels treated me like his equal. I did nearly everything he did during our 8 years together. I didn't need that to complete me. I also had a little nagging minor health issue at the time that has since been resolved. And once I made the decision and announced that I was not running, I was completely at peace. So I guess my point here is that it's very important to know when it's time to go. I had been an elected official for 36 years, had so many wonderful memories, and I also look forward to some exciting opportunities in the private sector. Now, I do think it's a matter of time, and perhaps just a short matter of time, until we have a woman as governor, perhaps 2024. We have quite a number of women serving as statewide officials, a lot of talent beyond that. We have a statewide official on this panel this morning, so who knows what the future will bring, but all of us have a responsibility to help make that happen.
I'll just add into that, and Becky, you said it so beautifully and eloquently. about your decisions and mine parallel, but I do think we just need to have the numbers in our favor at all levels. So while we have some great statewide offices filled and Suzanne in position now, if we want that to happen, we want more women in that state house, in all of those Senate and state rep roles, and in county government, in other areas of leadership, so that it becomes eminent that there is always a woman on that ticket for years to come, because we are over half of the population. So it should be happening at least 51% of the time, right? So I think there's still work to do, but I couldn't agree more with Becky. And I think this is where women are, we don't have, I'll say this in a kind way, we don't have as large of an ego often, that to the comments of Becky's discernment about whether she would run, we aren't going to do it just because we can. We're going to do it if we feel called to do it. And is that I use the term, the best seat on the bus for us. I know I'm in the best seat on the bus right now for me. And I think when Suzanne's time comes, she'll make that decision of what is that next step. And for other women in elected and those in the private sector right now who could do that, that is a decision that we should each discern very carefully, and then sign up or not, or do the next big thing in our lives. So it is a great question, Laura, because I can't wait till it happens, and I hope it happens sooner than later, and it will, but we all need to encourage more women to be open to the idea and then to discern if that's the right thing for them.
Well, and to follow up, Sue, upon what you said, you're absolutely right. We need more women in policy legislative positions. We have a lot of women in administrative positions, but we don't have quite as many women in those policy-making positions. And our General Assembly is a perfect example, as are most General Assemblies across the country. You mentioned we represent 52% of the electorate, and yet nationwide in General Assemblies, I think we're right around 27, 28%. And in Indiana, I think it's around 23%. So we need more women in those positions, because women change the dialogue and women bring a different perspective. I often, in my 8 years serving in the House and now as president of the Senate, and observing how the process works, women, it seems to me, were more about making things happen. We're more about getting the job done, working together, collaborating. And there's actually been studies at the national level showing that. And, so we need more of that in the legislative process in order to get better laws and to reflect more what our actual population is. So I couldn't agree with you more. My favorite prayer is the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And, that is what I try to guide my life. And that is what, I think at the end of the day, as I said earlier, I believe that things happen for a reason. I believe we're put in places, and I believe that what is meant to be is meant to be. So we will see what the future will bring, but I couldn't agree with you all more that we need to support more women, and women need to support women.
Absolutely. It's exciting to hear you all talk about this, because as a professor, these are things that we research, and these are things I tell my students, but then to hear your personal narratives, I'm like, yes, that's what we thought was true. It is in fact true. And at one point you mentioned, Lieutenant Governor Davis, of we need women to run. That's what all the research says. And I like to point out, I think the panelists probably know this into their heart, but just to people attending here, women win when they run. They win at equal rates when they run, but the challenge is we have fewer female candidates, so naturally we will have fewer female office holders. And so to some of the points that you mentioned in terms of encouraging other women, I also like some of the points like Lieutenant Governor Skillman mentioned, being the only woman in the room, and the idea of getting more women in these kind of positions, kind of a pipeline too. If we have more women in legislative positions, And it kind of brings me to this question for you of that experience of being the only woman in the room. And some of you have had that experience more or less. It's because of your leadership. It's changed it for women in my position, where I'm usually not the only woman in the room. But from your experience when you were like that, did you ever feel like you were treated differently, perhaps because you're a woman relative to your male counterparts, or did you suffer from imposter syndrome? Was there ever that moment you thought, gosh, I don't know if I should be here? I go through that sometimes. I'm kind of wondering if you ever had that experience, and how you handled it, how you kind of rectified it within yourself.
Well, I never felt that I did not belong, and I also felt very comfortable in that arena, but perhaps it was because I started at such an early age. I will tell you, however, I did feel outnumbered from time to time, and I will give you an example. In 1995, I authored the legislation that established the Indiana Commission for Women, and it was a bipartisan effort. Senator Vi Simpson of Bloomington was a second author on the bill. Should not have been controversial, right? We're establishing a repository of information for women and their families. You may know the Commission for Women today is hosting the Torchbearer Awards annually, but nevertheless, there was a lot of chatter and at least perceived controversy about it. And I took a lot of good-natured ribbing from my male colleagues during that period, with some of them saying they plan to remove their shirts when they voted on the Indiana Commission bill. I actually had one male colleague say, I think I will start a white man's caucus, to which I replied, you had one for 200 years.
Good, quick answer.
I certainly earlier in my career, being a female engineer, was many times the only woman in the room. So I think by the time I got into public service, that didn't surprise me anymore. I will tell one, this is maybe my one Republican story. At the RLGA, there was a practice of cigar smoking at the end of the evening. And I just had to laugh because, as we know, almost half, probably a third to half of lieutenant governors in the country now are women. But here's this silly practice, and I just would not let up on them until they got rid of it. Suzanne, I hope it's gone now, but I think
I haven't heard about it.
I shamed them enough, because you think about those things that add no value and are not inclusive, and those things are dissipating. That's the good news. And I think Becky shared, she was still on the front end of that, and we've all got to benefit from these practices. But I think you're sometimes surprised as a woman in these leadership positions when you run across crazy practices like that are absolutely not inclusive, not in the best interests of all. And we still have to bring them forward. So but I think everyone here handles that extremely well.
When I was young, really young, probably about 11, I was just 3 inches shorter than I am today. So I was actually taller than all the kids in my class and the school and some of the teachers. And so that being different at a young age always made me, made me realize that I was different, and that physical difference made me realize I was different. And so, being in a room and being the only woman in a room, it doesn't bother me. I recognize it's wrong. And today, even to today, when meeting with legislative leaders and, with the executive branch, I may be the only woman in the room. And that's with a whole lot of men. And so while it doesn't intimidate me, I recognize it's not right. And it's why we have to get more women in legislative positions. They have to be, I remember, Sue, you probably remember Charlie Brown, Representative Charlie Brown. Kathy, I don't know if he was in the General Assembly when you were there. Becky, yeah. And he always had a saying. He always used to say, if you aren't at the table, you might be on the menu. And I'll never forget that. And so that is why we need more women at the table, you know, because we don't want to be on the menu. We want to be the ones choosing the items and choosing what's important. So it never intimidated me, but I've always recognized it's wrong and we've got to do something to correct it.
That's a really good point too, because I think how do we do that? Like, what is it we could do? What would be maybe some advice that you could give, and not just to young women? I feel like a lot of times that's where advice is angled, but for, you know, mid-career women or just women in general, and probably also men. Like, what do you think we could do to make it more equal so that you wouldn't be the only woman? And in fact, we'd have a generation, we'd have an entire pipeline, and maybe we would have 51% of our state legislature and every state legislature female. What advice would you give to women and men in trying to change this and make it more gender equitable, I think, in our public service?
Well, I think they've done studies that women have to be asked in most cases, not always, but women like to be asked. Women like to have support, and women don't like to raise money. I think those in the studies that they've done, those are kind of 3 of the obstacles to getting women to run. And I think that we all have a responsibility to seek out those women that would be good office holders and encourage them to run for elected positions, hopefully in the General Assembly. And then we need to support them, not just financially, but we need to support them, you know, with our physical assistance. So that is what, in my opinion, we need to be proactive. We don't need to just let men run. We need to look at those districts that are out there and see who are the women that live in those districts that have the, you know, that have the background and the ability to be able to be good representatives or good senators, and then seek them out and recruit them and support them.
Suzanne, I'm going to go even a step further. I'll make it quick, Becky, that when we see women, that we are out there and encourage them, either side of the aisle, support them, and then ask them from a fundraising standpoint. Women aren't used to writing quite as big a checks. And I think we need to challenge our friends to take the leadership in their families of writing those checks with an extra 0 after them, so that we have control of the wealth. We don't tend to use it in a political way as much, and we should encourage that and have PACs, et cetera, that help support women.
Good point.
And I think it's also happening, right? I mean, it's clearly in this generation starting to happen, certainly nationally, and many signs in Indiana, maybe not as quickly. And I support everything that's been said, but I think events like today, where you're helping women see what the political landscape consists of and what the issues are, and help people both. You said, what are you called to do? And then find your best seat on the bus. I thought I wrote that down and I'm going to remember that. But anyway.
I want to share kudos and then a few thoughts. First of all, Suzanne Crouch is a fundraising machine. I did not like it. I did it. It comes with the territory. You're not going to be successful. But Suzanne, it seems effortless for you, and you have been so successful. I would name, if anyone asked me, what woman do you know who's been the best fundraiser ever, it would be Suzanne Crouch. So let me move on from that. I've actually been encouraged by sentiment among young women today, and I will explain what I mean by that. When I was in Senate Majority Leadership, and part of my responsibility was to recruit candidates for the Senate, of course, I'm going to women first. Sue Ellspermann, one of them, but she thought she was needed in the House. However, during that period, even backing up to the 90s, I would approach incredibly highly talented women in education, in business, and healthcare. And so often the response would be, oh, I'm not qualified for that. And yet, you could talk to men about some of those same opportunities, and they thought they were born qualified. And I say that to their credit. I think it's a matter of confidence. But I am encouraged today, if I speak on college campuses, there's a lot of young women in the room. I don't think they're going to wait for someone to ask them to run. I sense that they are ready to go. They are assertive, they're strong-willed, and I feel very good about the future.
That's excellent. I will tell you, as someone who teaches the new generation, I share the same kind of enthusiasm and experience. I think they have a lot more confidence, and that gender gap certainly is shrinking, but progress isn't inevitable. So of course we want to do what we can to help maintain and certainly achieve it. I wanted to throw it to some questions from the audience, because I have lots of questions, but it's not the Laura Wilson show. We're talking about you and your achievements here. So I have two questions that seem really similar. I'm going to combine them for the sake of time. So this one comes from Katie and then another from Catherine. But similar to how Lieutenant Governor Crouch mentioned the need to elevate women from administrative government roles to policy and higher leadership roles, how do we elevate Black women and women of color into these same policy roles? And the other question was also asking, we're underrepresented in terms of women, but we're incredibly underrepresented in terms of women of color. So what are some strategies or tactics we could do to try and change that?
Well, go ahead. No, you first.
Okay, quick, I'll just say that as a leader of a large institution, it has to start with that kind of leadership, that I have to recruit that same talent and promote and develop that talent. And Ivy Tech is all over. We have taken on equity, diversity, belonging in a very serious way. And that has to be at all levels. And as those individuals become the CEOs and COOs and CFOs and CIOs of those organizations, they become much more prepared and have the networks they need to proceed in whatever path of leadership they choose. So it's beyond politics. It is in all aspects, all sectors of life.
Yeah, and I think it's probably in every conversation that we have from this point forward. And I think we've just been learning that with the disparity in deaths due to COVID and a police officer who kills a man knowing he's being videotaped. It's, for me, a tremendous wake-up call in sort of the daily nature and the depth of racism. And I realize that's not directly what the question is about, but it reminds me for the city of Indianapolis that, if we're going to make real change, it really becomes equity first in every conversation that we're having, every investment. We're consciously putting that into the lens. And on the political side, it means going after it, right? And helping, really facilitating the engagement. If women like to be asked to run, I think it's true that women perhaps don't need that as much these days. But let's make sure we're asking people, especially, in the places that seem the easiest to start, and go from there and make it happen. And we're, as Sue said, we're presented to do that in everything that we do.
Well, and I think not only do we have the responsibility to reach out and to try to grow more women, not just women, Caucasian women, but women of color. I think it also, we are for women that I think people can reach out to also. And I would encourage people to reach out to us if they have any kind of interest at all in running, because I believe, I hope I'm not speaking out of term for the other three lieutenant governors on the call, but I think we would be happy to talk with a woman who really was interested and to give some advice as to how to move forward. So not only do we have a responsibility to be proactive, but we also are an incredible resource that, you know, we're available. You know, we have life experiences, and we can certainly talk to and consult with women that, you know, reach out.
I agree with everything that's been said. You know, diversity and inclusion has to be a focus. It has to be a priority. We're having these very same discussions at the corporate board level. And it's not only the right thing to do, but certainly will enrich our lives and move our communities forward.
I think these are all great pieces of advice. And one of my biggest challenges is when you look at our elected representatives and how sometimes they don't even, and not just perspective, but they don't even seem to look like the people they represent. And if we want truly democratic with the lowercase d here, but truly representative institutions, that's very important. I appreciate these pieces of advice. I'm looking at some other questions here, and one that really intrigues me. I don't know if you ever listened to How I Built This by Guy Raz on NPR, but he interviews people and about how they became really great entrepreneurs. And even though I don't have any business sense, I love it. You learn so much from it, great pieces of life advice, but he'll ask this question and he'll get to this. And so I wanna use this. This is a question from Andrea. And she said, what failure have you learned the most from? I think we all know a lot of times we don't learn from our successes nearly as much as our failures, as unfortunate as they are. But I'm curious for you, you know, personal or political, related to the lieutenant governor position, what failure really sticks out to you, and what did you learn from that?
Well, I think we do learn more from adversity than we do from success, because when you're successful, you just did it and you move on. And when something bad happens to you and you struggle, then you kind of turn inward and you really kind of contemplate what happened, what you've gone through, and how could it have been different, how can you do better. In public service, my biggest failure was that I learned the most from was the very first time I ran for county auditor, and I lost. And I actually was pregnant at the time. And I remember a woman, after I lost by less than 1% of the vote, but you know, a loss is a loss is a loss. And you take it very personally when you lose. You look at yourself and what could you have done differently? And I remember after the election, a woman sent me a letter and she said, you know, it is best that you lost because now you can stay home and you can raise your child. And I remember how that, you know, how that didn't really comfort me, Annie. But as I said, I always think things happen for a reason. And I learned so much from that loss. I learned a lot about myself, but I also learned a lot about how you can win, and went on then to win after that. But yeah, that was probably, from a political standpoint, that was my biggest failure and what I learned the most from.
I'll share the one that many of you will remember when Governor Pence and I were in office, and it was RFRA, when RFRA was passed. During that time, that was not on our agenda. It wasn't part of it, but it passed. We owned it. We got 2 billion tweets over a 2-week period around it. And I'll say 2 things. One is, I think Indiana is in a better spot now, as we all came together and really have now as a state leaned into that inclusivity as a state. But for me personally, it's leadership during those difficult times. I can remember bringing my team around, all of us lieutenant governors, remember the big table in our office, and saying to these young professionals, I know this is hard for you, but we need to be here and we need to listen to every Hoosier when they call. We need to understand this is a difficult time and work through this together. Now, as I'm at Ivy Tech, I've had so many younger professionals there say, you're not very flustered by this COVID thing. And I said, oh no, I've been through worse. But these are the things that make us stronger, right? And it's how we act during the storm, how we keep people together, help them care about one another, work through it in the most productive way. And that's where I see women bringing great leadership, because we don't dig our heels in. we try to figure things out. We try to make the world better tomorrow. You can't change what happened yesterday. We can't change COVID right now. What we control is how we respond to it. And I think you have to have these tough situations so that you're prepared the next time to handle it better and more productively, and hopefully bring things to a better place.
And I hear you describing, Sue, kind of being confronted by a crisis as opposed to a failure. And I think I would just like to echo everything you've said about sort of the opportunity to make good in a crisis. Real opportune times to make change.
Great point.
A couple of thoughts about failure, one personal, one not so personal. I lost only one bill during my 12 years in the Indiana Senate. And I remember the vote. It was 26 to 24 against. And what I learned was I could have done so much more, right? I mean, you didn't talk to every one of your colleagues. Even if you think you made the best case on the floor in public debate, there's always more that could be done. I was determined I would never lose another bill because it doesn't feel good, and I didn't. Now, attorney friends who were serving also in the Senate at the time said, oh, you guys, you wear your heart on your sleeve. We're attorneys. We lose cases every day in court. But to me, it felt personal, and I knew there were a lot of counties at that time depending on me to have forward movement for them on this issue, and it didn't happen. And the second point is that I mentioned earlier my experience about considering running for governor and ultimately not doing that. Although I was at peace with the decision, I did feel like a bit of a failure because I had let down friends and supporters and my staff, and at the time I thought a whole lot of women. So that's not a good feeling. But then a couple of years later, I see all of these women running for and getting elected to statewide office, and that sure helps. You feel a bit validated and vindicated.
These are all great pieces of advice. I think everyone experiences failure, and to what you said, Lieutenant Skillman, and actually Lieutenant Governor Crouch, you do take it personally, right? Even though it might not be something that stands out to people, they may not even remember it the next day. As you talk about your own failures, I think, man, just to get to that position to run for office like that, yes, it's a failure, but it's an incredible challenge and an incredible opportunity as well.
And I think responding fast makes a huge difference if it's actually a failure. I think we've heard about leadership challenges and how people come through them. I remember doing a change to the assembly line at Cummins and not having checked every detail and not building engines for quite a few days was something that didn't work, and being reminded that you don't want to micromanage, but you also want to know for sure that your ground is covered and you're so.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time, your perspective, and your advice with us. I know I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope that everyone listening did too. There were many other great questions. We simply have run out of time, but I do want to thank each one of you for joining us. I know you were incredibly busy and probably very wanted for many different things, but to spend this time here really was incredible.